Varsity Club podcast. My name is Derek Peterson. I am excited to be joined this week by Varsity's fearless leader, Brandon Vogel. Brandon, hello. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Not too bad of weather for me where I'm at, so all things pretty good. Minus the lack of football, but what are you gonna do?
Well, you got championship weekend, conference championship weekend in the NFL this weekend coming up. Are you following?
What's the NFL? No, actually, this is about when I start watching. I did watch last week. I was pretty interested in that Bengals-Bills game, so I was like, I'm gonna say, when does this game start? I'm gonna sit down and watch this. That almost never happens with me with pro football, so I'm coming around.
Well, what's funny is I saw several people on social media make the same joke that we're so sort of infatuated with finding parity in college football because we have the same 3 or 4 teams in the college football playoff every year. And yet here we are once again with Bengals, Niners, and Chiefs in conference championship weekend, 3 of the 4 again. And I didn't really know what to do with that. I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like I said, I don't follow the NFL closely enough. Like, it's just something about playoff football. I think the reason I don't watch more NFL is that it's almost too good. Like I've gotten used to and really kind of love the imperfections of college football, and kickers are just going to miss more often, and it's not going to look as clean. You're not going to see quite as many amazing plays. It's like the rundown car that I know. Like, you got to do this if you want it to really operate efficiently. You could just get the new car and it just works. But I like my old car.
To that point, I saw a TikTok video last night. We're recording this Thursday. Wednesday night, my wife and I are sitting on the couch, and a TikTok video comes up. And it's a girl who is watching football with her family. And it's a clip where a running back, sort of from her perspective, just runs right into the massive bodies. And the video is her being like, just run around. Just why are you not running around? Just run around. That's where all the people are. Just run around. And I open the comments and it's all of the same comment. Like, I've never understood why they don't just run around. Just go to the outside. That's where all the people are. And Alex is looking at it because the audio is looped because I'm reading comments. And she starts looking at it with me and she's like, yeah, that's the thing I've never, just go around. Just go around. That's where all the people are. And I'm like, Alex, let me explain something to you. In the NFL, all 11 of those players are just as fast as that running back is on the defensive side of the football. He can't just go around because they're going to catch him. You've got guys right there whose entire responsibility are edge containment. And you've got a safety who's going to run him down and take his head off if he tries to go outside. And then it brought me back to Maurice Washington's time at Nebraska, where he would try to bounce everything outside. And eventually the coaches were just like, you just need to stand on the sideline until you can figure out that we need you to run where the play is designed to go. So that was an entertaining night, but it was, to that point about NFL just being too good, like, you can't just run around because they're going to catch you.
Yeah, and that is the perfect example, because a couple of times Maurice Washington did go around and was fast enough to get the edge, and that was it a rush or was it a pass against Colorado? Anyway, the 75-yard touchdown, felt like a schoolyard football play. So in college, you can still maybe occasionally get away with that. In the NFL, it's no. Everyone is too good.
Yeah. Yep. Brandon, I have you on today because I saw a tweet from John Bishop a couple days ago. It was a poll that he put out. I answered the poll. I don't know if you did. I'm sure you have thoughts because I told you we were going to be talking about this. Which of these terms would you use to describe what kind of job Matt Rhule has in year 1 at Nebraska? He had 4 terms: rebuild, reload, reset, or starting from scratch. Starting from scratch actually had not as many votes as I thought it was going to. I picked reset, which had nearly 50% of the vote. So I wanted to talk to you about this because I think this is really interesting, because when we get new head coaches, we get into that conversation of, is this a year 0? Is this a year 1? How many years does he need before we can feasibly start judging what he's putting on the field? All that kind of nonsense. as you approach this off season now, I mean, we're getting into winter conditioning. Nebraska's at 23 signed high school kids in the 23 class, 3 more who still have yet to be signed, and then double digit transfer players so far. The window will open again in May. We're approaching like 40 scholarship newcomers. And like that's big and that's new. It's not necessarily like unique because a bunch of teams have done that this offseason. But it is unique for Nebraska specifically. So as you sort of approach this offseason, like where are you starting from? Is this a rebuild, a reload, a reset, or something else?
Yeah, this has been an interesting conversation that's kind of taken up residence amongst Husker fans and media this week. So you had Matt Rhule's appearance on Bussin' with the Boys, where he talked about that he doesn't want this to be a slow burn, which is interesting because year one at Temple and year one at Baylor were very slow, controlled burns. So that's interesting. I think Scott Docterman, the great reporter who covers Iowa for The Athletic, may have likened it more to starting from scratch. That might be where that one comes from. And then Steve Sipple, now of On3, I think called it more of a reset. So starting from scratch, I think I can scratch that one for myself. I do not think it's that. It's definitely not a reload. So that leaves me between rebuild and reset. I will go with reset, I think, as someone who, frustratingly for myself, and I think frustratingly for plenty of others along the way, still maintain that Nebraska was better than its actual results on the field during much of the Frost era. It just got to a point where it's like, well, they're never actually, those two things are never going to meet in the middle with, they're just as good as they appear to be in some facets. So that's why it's not a total rebuild for me, though if you wanted to argue for a rebuild mindset, that's probably the wisest way to go. That's the thing with this, is like even saying reset, feels like, oh, are you not dealing fully with reality? I don't think that's the case. At least I'm comfortable enough to say that reset's my pick.
Okay, here, let me ask you if this is just like too in the weeds, too semantics. When I think of rebuild, I think of so what the Oklahoma City Thunder have done, right? We had Kevin Durant, we had Russell Westbrook, we had Serge Ibaka, we made it to a conference finals, we were close to finals. Kevin Durant left. He kind of like threaded the needle, he being our general manager. And we have sort of rebuilt without sort of destroying the foundation of what the team is supposed to be, what the culture of the team is supposed to be. He's sort of maintained what he wants the team to look like and what he wants sort of the roster composition to be throughout the years since Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook have left Oklahoma City. When I think of like a reset, and do you disagree with me on this? When I think of a reset, like I kind of am thinking like that carries with it an element of recalibrating sort of mentally what you expect to be, or recalibrating what you think expectations are. So when I think of like in college football terms, a reset for a program would be like, okay, we were banging, from Nebraska's perspective, we were banging our head against the wall for years and years and years, trying to recapture this very specific way of doing things, trying to sort of, the knock has been trying to get back to the 90s. A reset to me would mean that you're completely recalibrating. Like, it's kind of similar to starting from scratch for me.
Interesting. Because maybe as my answer indicated, I view reset as maybe a little bit softer than a rebuild. But I see where you're coming from. I guess maybe let's think about Georgia when Kirby Smart arrives. What of these 4 choices, what did Kirby Smart do at Georgia? Definitely wasn't a start from scratch. I mean, no. Mark Richt was winning 9-10 games a year, just couldn't quite get to the final stage. I wouldn't call it a rebuild. I mean, that one to me seems like a reset. Like, yeah, you bring in Kirby Smart, get some new ideas, a little bit kind of a renewed zeal, I guess, on the recruiting trail, probably. I mean, based on their results, I assume that happened to a degree at Georgia. So maybe I'm just making this more complicated by trying to apply it to another example.
No,
But
I think that's the perfect example for what I was trying to say, because I feel like Kirby Smart got to Georgia and said, "This is freaking Georgia. Look at where we are relative to where all of the high-end recruits are. We should be able to keep all of these guys. We should be able to get all of these guys," because Georgia was not recruiting like this under Mark Richt. And so I
no,
think like a reset for them with Kirby Smart coming aboard was sort of a recalibration of how they viewed their program and how they viewed what they could accomplish if they, push the right resources into the middle of the table. And so, like, I kind of feel like that's maybe what Nebraska is doing now. It feels like a little absurd to sort of say Nebraska is doing what Georgia did with Kirby Smart, because that would also be like, are you saying they're going to win a national championship or two national? No, not yet. But it kind of feels a little. I mean, am I reading too much into that? Is that?
no, I don't think so. It's just further down the scale. So, Georgia was trying to reset, we'll use that term for them, from, Rick's kind of perennial 10-2. You win the division every couple of years, but you never quite get over being a national title favorite year in and year out, which Kirby Smart has done. So they had to reset from that to get to that next one. If we're talking about this in Nebraska's sense, and I do get the sense from Rhule in listening to him talk, in that podcast interview, Busting with the Boys, he said, he thinks Nebraska's kind of big, like, tear it down rebuild year was actually last season. He just wasn't here for it. So that's interesting. But for Nebraska, you're talking about, okay, they went 5-19 or whatever the record was. I forget now, which is kind of hard to believe because it was about the only thing to talk about. But the one score record under Scott Frost, like, you're trying to reset from that, which the fact that you were in that many one score games tells you, like, okay, this, may not be as bad as Nebraska's .300 winning percentage or whatever it was. But you've got to find something. Why did they lose all those games in that painfully same type of way, the same fashion? That's the part where somebody like Matt Rhule, a competent coaching staff, not saying the previous one wasn't, but somebody who just comes in is like, okay, that's a key problem. We've got to figure out, like, why did that happen? How do we change it? You don't have to start from scratch or rebuild anything. You just gotta reset. I think it's the word I keep coming back to.
Yeah, and this certainly doesn't feel like starting from scratch, because like, even as painful as the years have been, or as sort of like disappointing as things have been, like, I don't feel like, they don't have to. I don't feel like they have to rebuild fan investment in the program. That's there. That's going to be there. I don't feel like they have to rebuild. I don't feel like Matt Rhule has to rebuild trust from, like, Nebraska's administration that this football program is worth resources. Like, that's not like they're getting elite resources compared to, just comparatively. Like, I guess so. Then what needs to be the expectation for Rhule in year one? Because he says he doesn't want it to be a slow burn, and sort of, we're seeing this more and more. Like, Kalen DeBoer goes 11-2 in his first year after taking over a team that sort of imploded, and really tore it down. Like, we've seen teams that have hit the transfer portal very hard in like immediate recent memory and immediately turn around their fortunes. Like, do you think that Matt Rhule believes that this can be a similar kind of situation, or do you think that he's approaching this as like, just get to a bowl game this year and see what happens? Like, if we're 6-6, but it looks fine, like, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think he does believe that, well, maybe the better way to put it is, I don't get the sense that he comes in and is like, if we go 2-10 or 3-9 again, that's okay because it's important to you. Like the work that we have to do might require that. I don't get the might require that part of it, and the coach is going to be praiseworthy of his new spot, of course, but he's talked about that Iowa win and some things like that stood out to him. So I'm expecting, we'll see, the kind of way too early power ratings, not the way too early top 25s, but the actual models probably start to come out here in the next week or two. I'm guessing once they do, like Nebraska's preseason win total is probably going to be around 6 again. I'm guessing. We'll see. But that's kind of where they've been for the past 3-4 years. And I expect that's kind of where this new group will start out. I don't know if people will think that's a fair expectation for Matt Rhule in year one or not, but I think it's a pretty accurate representation of where this program is at. And when you add another recruiting class, like they basically added, the rest of it becomes final in a week or two on the February signing day, but bringing in nearly 40 new players. And I expect Nebraska to have a good deal of attrition after spring. I think they didn't have quite as much as I thought they would in this December to January period, but I think you'll see more of it in May as players go through spring and get a better feel for things. But if getting to a bowl game is like the minimum expectation, like I think Nebraska is well positioned to do that under this new set of coaches. And if they do, I would consider that a success. So you have to at this point. They haven't been since 2016. So maybe that's not as shocking as anyone thinks.
What's the value in this specific kind of scenario for a coaching staff coming in to have sort of like to have an answer at quarterback in January? Like you have a guy in Casey Thompson who he's been around this before. He's gone through sort of transitioning playbooks before. He's gone through learning new teammates before. He's gone through learning a new coaching staff before. He's like this, and pretty good quarterback that you have you have for 9 months before, you have to play your first football game. Like, what's the value that adds to this kind of specific situation? Because that feels unique. Even teams, new coaches that take over, that come in and bring, like, to go back to Kalen DeBoer, it wasn't, Michael Penix wasn't on the roster. They brought that guy in. And so there was, they didn't have this kind of time. Like Casey Thompson was there when Matt Rhule walked into the building for the first time.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty big deal. You look at, when I think about things that would kind of change my outlook for 2023, which will probably change like 300 times between now and we get to August anyway. But that would be a big one. Like if you're out there and you've got to find a quarterback in the portal, most likely you try and recruit one, although almost all the high school quarterbacks are long gone before Matt Rhule even officially accepted the Nebraska job. It makes a big difference. Like just experience at quarterback always matters, but continuity matters a lot too. And with Casey Thompson, like he's older than the wide receivers coach that Nebraska has now. And it's not just, he's been in college for a while and that's how it worked out. And Nebraska went really young. His maturity shows. Like I was super, super impressed with Casey Thompson all season long. Just the way he talks, it's clear his devotion to the game of football. Like he's good at playing football, but he's also interested in it, I think. And I think that'll be a good fit for this coaching staff. You look at the offense kind of more broadly, you return a ton of starts on the offensive line. If we want to joke about whether that's a good deal or a bad deal, we can. I certainly hear that piece of it, but
man,
really right now,
not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but Stanford last year really sort of challenged my belief that getting continuity on the offensive line is a good thing. That offensive line was just rough. It was so bad. And they brought back 100% of everything.
Well, yeah. And I think by Action Network's calculation, Nebraska was at like 88% of its snaps returned on the offensive line, which was second in the Big Ten. First was Maryland. Maryland had a pretty good season. Nebraska did not. So But more broadly, like right now, what we know right now is in terms of that offense, you basically lose Trey Palmer. Vogel hurts too. He was, I think, Nebraska's third leading receiver. But in terms of returning production, they're going to get a good chunk of it back, particularly on that side of the ball. So I look at those things, and if this were any other team in the country, and the same thing were true, I'd be like, okay, they're starting from a decent spot for a team that was 4-8 the year before.
And I think that this quarterback spot too is why, getting back to the initial question that kicked this whole conversation off, is why I don't think you can call it a rebuild or a reload, because it's not like, you think about the quarterback transfer market a year ago this time. Like, you had Caleb Williams, you had Dylan Gabriel going to Oklahoma. There were big names. There were big names in the portal. And like this cycle, who was the biggest name? Maybe like Sam Hartman from Wake.
Yeah, probably.
DJU was probably like the biggest name, quote unquote name. But like, like let's just say he's in the previous class. Like, is Lincoln Riley saying, I'm going to take DJU, he's going to be my guy? I don't really think so. The quarterback transfer market just didn't seem as robust this winter. Maybe that changes in the spring. Maybe there's some guys that jump in the spring. Ole Miss is probably going to have a guy jump in the spring. But Nebraska doesn't need to worry about that. And Nebraska, Matt Rhule didn't have to sort of concern himself with that, of thinking like, hey, some of these guys, like there are going to be questions. Now, he did take a transfer quarterback, but it's not somebody that he's going to have to immediately rely on. And so like, I kind of look at this and I'm like, this is, to go back to sort of the mental piece of it, which I think is going to be the important one for them, because that, when you lose that many 1-score games, like the mental piece of it becomes such a huge thing. And I think that's the primary thing that Rhule has to rebuild in year one, is just rebuilding that sort of mentality that, hey, this is new. This is not the same thing. We're going to step on this football field and the same thing is not going to happen again.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the key challenge. And it's one of those things that, I think Rhule has shown through his college stops. It's clear that he reaches people. He is, in my experience, just the times I've been able to hear him speak, is a very relatable person to a broad swath of people, which is probably a prerequisite if you want to be a college football head coach now. And we'll see. It's like I said, I think Nebraska has a chance to surprise people in a positive way right away. If that doesn't happen, does it mean things are off schedule or behind schedule? No, I don't think so. It's a unique situation, and it's a unique time in college football. On the transfer quarterback point, like I hadn't even thought about this until you were kind of talking through it, but it seems like quarterback going with the head coach is a good thing. When you think about Williams and Riley to USC, Penix and DeBoer, who had been together previously at Indiana, to Washington. You had the Western Kentucky offense from 2 years ago, where they basically brought over Incarnate Word's entire offensive brain trust plus the quarterback. So interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
At Oklahoma.
And there you
go. A little off topic here, but also not. I feel like Deion Sanders is approaching Colorado as a starting from scratch situation.
Yeah.
And I am so excited for the Nebraska-Colorado game. And my excitement for that game grows by the day. Did you listen to the whole Bussin' with the Boys? Did you hear or see Rhule's comment about how like we're not going to have cameras in our meeting rooms? We're not going to do that. Did you interpret that as a shot at Deion, or just a comment in general? Because a lot of coaches have cameras in the meeting room. Like Luke Fickell's Wisconsin program tweeted out a video of him talking to the team. But like Deion has had a camera seemingly in every single meeting that they've had. Did you interpret that as a shot at Colorado?
No, not totally. I mean, and I didn't watch the video. I did listen to the podcast. So maybe there was a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge as he said that. But I think it was clear you know, I don't think he was talking about Dion specifically, but Dion is the person we all go to immediately with the Amazon Prime series, and just like what Jackson State and did on social media. Not only when he took the Colorado job, not only was it, okay, I got to go tell my team that this is officially happening, I'm going to go tell them there's going to be a camera there and we're going to put it out. And the meeting, that initial meeting with the returning Colorado players, which, struck people is kind of harsh, I guess, for lack of a better term. It certainly struck me that way. It's a different era. And I think Coach Rhule was mostly just saying, you know what, that's fine, but that's not us. That's not how we go about it. And I thought he did a good job, because I think, if I remember correctly, he talked about kind of building relationships with the players, and how that was his reasoning for not bringing the cameras in. He wanted that to be kind of their own thing. But speaking of quarterbacks going with their coach, Colorado fits that mold too.
Yeah. And that will be interesting, because they also got linked to the Jaden Rashada kid from Florida, which seemed interesting. Kind of seems like Dion just wants to be involved in every single recruitment possible. I made the joke with somebody yesterday that Colorado and these recruiting graphics, these like top whatever recruiting graphics nowadays, is like Jude Law from the mid 2000s. Like, they're in everything. Every single top 6 graphic you see, Colorado is there. He's just like sending out offers left and right. Like, no, yeah, come. And to that end, it's sort of like competing ideologies on how to rebuild a roster, or how to, sort of take over a program. Because another thing that has been different about their approach, one of the things that Rhule said early on, I don't remember like when specifically, like which press conference it was, but early on, a bunch of people made note of it, was when he said that all of these guys here, these are my guys. We're not doing the previous regime's guys. We're not doing the my guy. These are all my guys. Compare that to Dion's first meeting, where he walks into a team, and I didn't think it was super harsh. I thought he was just calling a spade a spade. That team sucked last year. It was very bad last year. And he told them, I'm bringing my own guys. So if you don't want to compete, hit the transfer portal. That's a different approach.
It is, and I can see the credit to him for, like you said. I think it was jarring for me to hear it put so plainly, but I think that's because almost nobody ever puts it that plainly. There's plenty of coaches out there who have and who will, oh yeah, I'm going to play this, so I keep as much of what we have and bring in as much as I think I need, because it just gives me more options. And if I find out later, oh, I don't need those guys over there, well, then you got to have, a difficult conversation about, hey, maybe you might see some more playing time if you thought about the portal. And it might suck if you're a player to hear that the first day or two that your new coach is on the job. But honestly, maybe better than 4 or 5 months down the road.
Yeah. But also I just don't see Matt Rhule approaching it the same way. And that's not to say that one is the right way to approach a takeover, and one is the wrong way to. But Matt Rhule doesn't strike me as the guy who's going to approach it that way. Which is also, to bring it back again, why I think the mentality piece of a reset is so crucial, because I think Rhule thinks that he's got a team.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we haven't heard a ton from him. Being on a podcast for 50 or however long minute interview that was, outside of his kind of initial press conference, that's as much as we had. And I think, we'll definitely hear from Rhule on the February signing day, I think, and then we'll be in spring football not too long after that. So more to come. But I think Rhule so far, I would agree with your assessment. I think he does think he has a team. I also think he's really confident in their ability to do this at the college level. And I think we've talked for 10 years now about Nebraska and its place in college football and where it used to be. Can it ever be close to that again? Rhule strikes me as somebody who really believes that no, you can do it there. You can still do it there. And I'm not talking about 3 national titles in 4 years, but you can be competitive. You can be as good as you want to be. There's not limitations to it in the way that really the past decade for Nebraska football has been like, well, if in 2012 you're like, oh yeah, they're really close under Bo Pelini. They just need to win one of these conference title games, and then you'll be in playoff contention. And now it's like, just win the division every couple of years and make it to a conference championship game. Like I don't know if Rhule views it that way. I think he kind of looks at we can do what we need to do. We can do anything we want to do here.
Yeah, and certainly the expanded playoff coming in year 2 helps. Is it a year or is it 2 years? It's not this season. Is it next season or the year after?
I think it's 2024, I believe.
Okay. So it'll be the first year of the new Big Ten. And even UCLA is not making a playoff, so you really only have to worry about USC. Sorry, Chip. With that expanded playoff, like I feel like right away we're going to see a 9-3 team in the playoff, like right away. I wouldn't be surprised if we got an 8-4 SEC at-large team in the playoff. Just with a 12-team field, like it wouldn't surprise me if that happened, especially if it was Alabama or LSU or Georgia or Florida. Like there are a couple schools where you're just like they're going to get the benefit of the doubt. And I kind of think, given Nebraska's pedigree, if a few years down the line you have proven and Rhule gets this thing going, and it's not like a 2-10 year 1, and then a 5-7 year 2, and then a 7-6 year 3, something like that. Like Nebraska could probably be a kind of program that gets that benefit of the doubt, because I think the college football playoff committee will also know that Nebraska fans will travel wherever they send Nebraska to, and that'll probably play a role. So like, you just have to get there. It's a little bit easier. You just have to get there. And, I think Rhule's coming in at a good time.
Yeah, I think a lot of years, in the Big Ten with an expanded playoff to 12 teams, like you got to be one of not every year maybe, but many years, like you got to be one of the 3 best teams in the Big Ten. And right now, when we look at that conference, it's basically Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. So, all of a sudden, I mean, you look at what's the narrative on Penn State and James Franklin, and Penn State's going to be a really, really buzzy team this offseason. They're going to start the year in the top 10. Like they're in a good spot. But that comes with, okay, you're in a good spot. If James Franklin goes 10-2 again and loses to Ohio State and Michigan, you finish 3rd in your division, people are going to be upset. 12-team playoff, like you're in the playoff and you get to keep taking your shots. I mean, Matt Rhule's last Baylor team. I haven't gone and matched it up specifically with the criteria we've got for a 12-team playoff, but that team's in the playoff. Baylor's in the playoff. 2 years removed from going 1-11 in year 1. So I think that's when Matt Rhule looks at Nebraska, he probably sees like, well, we got that close with Baylor. There's no reason that we can't do that in Nebraska, a place that has a deeper and longer football tradition and every resource you could possibly want.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the Baylor team that didn't get in because the Big 12 split the title between them and TCU, right? Was that year?
No, that was 2014, I think, when Baylor and TCU were there and didn't have a title game. I'm talking about, was it 2019 when they lost to Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game?
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That team, I think, probably still gets in. Like I said, I'd have to go back and look and see if they were actually ranked high enough after losing to Oklahoma State. But theoretically, if they didn't, they were like number 13.
I saw something completely aside. I saw something the other day that was like breaking down the last few years, and like 2013 to 2019 was all just 2016. And then 2020, 21, and 22, pandemic. And I was like, that's pretty much what it feels like. Yeah. That's what it feels like.
Yeah,
Or plague, I think is what they said. Plague. Like the 5 years before 2020 were just 2016. It's the year 2016. That's it. And then the last 3 years have just been plague, which is what it feels like. So, Brandon, we have a little bit of news for the podcast, I guess. This will be for folks listening. This will be my last episode. So I'll let Brandon explain sort of what the move is after this.
Yeah, so very bittersweet podcast for me. I'll try not to talk too much here. Well, not even bittersweet, just bitter, because Derek has done a phenomenal job. I'm sorry, Derek, I'm going to talk about you like I'm not talking directly to you. I'm talking to the listeners right now. Derek has done a phenomenal job with this show. I love listening to this podcast each week. Back when Derek started with Hail Varsity, I think I recall one of our first phone conversations, and we're just kind of talking generally and broadly about Hail Varsity, and we hadn't officially hired Derek yet, but it was that phone call. And I probably mentioned something about like pushing into podcasts was something that was on my list of things to do for the future. We did hire Derek, showed up. For those of you that read his work when he was working at Hail Varsity full time, you certainly saw the quality of the writing and the reporting, all of that. But really, this podcast exists because you dove in and pushed it out there. I mean, this started as a weekly post where we would talk about the upcoming game, a written post. And then one day you asked me, what if we do it as a podcast? And I was like, I would love to do that. We're not set up to do that in any way. And you basically said, well, we'll figure it out. And here we are, a couple of years later. You've had a family change and moved to Chicago, which is great. I know it's a city you always wanted to live in, which I also think you might have told me on one of those first phone calls. And here we are. Your duties covering Pac-12 football for your current outlet have increased. So making the decision to transition this show from Derek to myself. Aaron Sorensen's going to be a regular part of the show. Elijah Herbal, who does great work on Hail Varsity Radio in the afternoons, is going to be along with us. So we're going to keep the show going. We'll probably take a little bit of a hiatus to just either rebuild, reload, reset, or start from scratch. I haven't decided which of those four this will be. Now, that one will definitely be a reload, though it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to replace you, Derek. So I appreciate you basically getting us into the podcast space, because that's really what this show represents to me.
Yeah. So I'm happy I'm excited to hear Elijah get a little bit more of a platform than he already has. I enjoy listening to him on the radio. I'll enjoy listening to him on this podcast, whatever the rebrand or whatever you guys choose to do with it. It'll keep showing up in my feed because I'll stay subscribed. So I just want to say to the folks who are listening, to you, Brandon, and the Hail Varsity team, and then to Cam, who has been producing this episode for God knows how long. I didn't even know TCU, time is a flat circle at this point. I appreciate you guys. It was fun. Thank you to all of the folks who listen to this every week. And I hope you continue to listen to this every week. I will. It'll continue to be a good show, or at least I hope you think it's a good show. Yeah, it's been fun. So, Brandon, I'm sure you've got some stuff that you got to do. So we'll leave it at that. I will say thank you. Shouts to you guys for listening to this episode every week. Shouts to Brandon for being on this week. Shouts to Cam for producing. This show will be back soon in the near future. Not going to set a specific date. Let them figure it out. They got some stuff that they're going to work through. I will not be back, but this show will certainly be back. So keep listening. And also subscribe to HailVarsity.com if you haven't already. Get that taken care of. HailVarsity.com/subscribe. Use the promo code Varsity. All right. It's been fun. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.